There is a kind of tiredness that remains even after rest, even after sleep, even after a quiet weekend where nothing demanding happened. And this tiredness is often confusing because rest is supposed to help. Many adults notice it most clearly on Sunday evenings or Monday mornings, when time away has passed, but the body and mind do not feel renewed, only prepared enough to begin again. This tiredness does not come from lack of sleep alone. It does not disappear with an extra hour in bed, and it does not respond quickly to breaks or pauses. Instead, it settles quietly and becomes familiar, almost expected, as though rest has changed its purpose without anyone noticing. In modern life, rest often functions as maintenance rather than restoration. It restores enough energy to keep routines moving, but it rarely reaches the deeper layers where emotional weight accumulates. Many people rest with the intention of recovering function, not reconnecting with themselves. And this difference is subtle but important. Days off become time to catch up, to organize, to prepare for what comes next, rather than time to feel present or unburdened. Even moments that appear restful on the surface are often filled with quiet mental activity, thinking ahead, replaying conversations, tracking responsibilities, and holding future tasks loosely in the background. This means that while the body may stop moving, the inner effort rarely pauses. Over time, rest becomes another task, another part of the system designed to keep life running smoothly. This kind of tiredness grows not because there is no rest, but because rest no longer interrupts the rhythm of responsibility. It simply fits inside. Many adults experience this without naming it, because they are doing what they are supposed to do, taking breaks, sleeping enough, finding time when possible, and yet the sense of depletion remains. This creates confusion and sometimes quiet frustration, because the usual solutions no longer seem to work. Rest begins to feel shallow, like it only reaches the surface, leaving something deeper untouched. In everyday routines, emotional effort continues even during rest, holding together roles, expectations, and identities that do not switch off easily. Being reliable, being available, being capable. These traits often stay active regardless of whether the schedule says work or rest. The mind remains slightly alert, slightly engaged, slightly on call. Over time, this constant low-level engagement becomes normal, and tiredness becomes something that is carried rather than resolved. What makes this kind of exhaustion difficult to recognize is that life continues to function. Tasks get done, relationships are maintained, responsibilities are met, and from the outside, everything appears stable. There is no clear signal that something is wrong, no breakdown, no crisis, no visible failure. As a result, this tiredness often feels illegitimate, as though it does not deserve attention because nothing dramatic has happened. Many adults quietly dismiss it, assuming it is simply part of adulthood, part of maturity, or part of caring about things that matter. Over time, this belief settles in, and tiredness becomes a background condition rather than a signal worth listening to. Rest continues, but it is used primarily to recover enough energy to keep going, not to release what has been accumulating emotionally. Weekends end without a sense of fullness. Evenings pass quickly without leaving a lasting impression, and sleep becomes a way to reset the body without fully calming the mind. In this pattern, exhaustion is not loud or urgent. It is steady and persistent. It does not demand attention. It simply stays. Modern life often reinforces this pattern by rewarding consistency and endurance. Productivity is valued, emotional control is praised, and the ability to continue functioning despite fatigue is often seen as strength. This makes it easy for emotional tiredness to remain unaddressed because it does not interfere with performance. As long as life keeps moving, the cost of carrying this tiredness remains mostly invisible. Over time, however, this quiet exhaustion shapes how life feels. Joy becomes more muted, not absent, but softer. Frustration becomes background noise, present but rarely expressed. Curiosity fades slightly, replaced by practicality. The inner world becomes narrower, more focused on maintenance than exploration. Rest does not fail because it is insufficient in quantity. It fails because it is disconnected from emotional release. Many adults rest their bodies while continuing to carry the same emotional weight they held during work, the same sense of responsibility, the same internal expectations. This means that rest does not create space. It simply creates a pause in action. Without space, tiredness remains. Over long periods, this pattern becomes self-reinforcing. The more tired someone feels, the more they rely on rest to restore basic function, and the less they expect rest to bring anything more. Expectations lower quietly, and tiredness becomes part of normal life. This does not happen suddenly, and it does not feel dramatic. It unfolds slowly as routines tighten and emotional space becomes smaller. Life continues to work, and because it works, there is little pressure to question how it feels. The absence of crisis makes it easy to overlook the presence of fatigue. Many adults carry this tiredness without talking about it, because it is difficult to explain.
Saying tired does not seem accurate enough, and saying exhausted feels too strong. There is often no clear language for this in-between state, and without language it becomes easier to ignore. Over time, this quiet endurance becomes a habit. Emotional effort continues in the background, holding together relationships, schedules, and expectations, even during moments that are supposed to be restful. The mind remains slightly active, slightly tense, slightly forward-looking. Rest becomes a bridge between responsibilities rather than a place to arrive. Not every form of tiredness means something is broken, and not every kind of exhaustion needs to be fixed immediately. Some tiredness is simply the result of long periods of emotional effort that were never fully released. This does not make rest useless, but it changes what rest can accomplish. Rest can restore energy without restoring depth, function without fullness. Recognizing this difference does not require conclusions or solutions. It only requires noticing that there are forms of tiredness rest does not easily fix, and that this experience is common in modern adult life. Life can be organized and still feel draining. Schedules can be balanced and still leave little room to feel renewed. Rest can be present and still feel incomplete. This does not mean rest is failing. It means rest is being asked to do more than it was designed to do. Emotional weight often requires acknowledgement before it can be released, and acknowledgement does not always come naturally in routines built around productivity and consistency. Simply noticing that this tiredness exists and that it does not disappear with rest alone can soften the pressure to push through it. It can create a small pause in the assumption that tiredness is something to ignore or minimize. Not everything that feels exhausting needs an immediate explanation, and not every form of fatigue needs a solution. Some experiences are part of the inner landscape shaped by modern routines, expectations, and responsibilities. Allowing space to notice this kind of tiredness does not change life overnight, but it can change how that tiredness is carried. Sometimes the shift is not in doing more or resting harder, but in recognizing what rest cannot reach on its own. This recognition does not fix anything, but it can bring clarity, and clarity can be enough to make exhaustion feel less confusing, even if it remains.